So this is the album To Infinity, which is the debut album from German-born Stephanie de Boer, who performs as O-SHiN. And according to her Spotify bio, O-SHiN means time for a good cry in Japanese, which is it's quite interesting. So if you're looking for O-SHiN, it's spelled in all caps O-SHIN, and To Infinity is the number 2 in Roman numerals / the infinity symbol.
Yeah.
What was that, your little impression?
That was me doing infinity. Like,
yeah. That's quite hard
for the uninitiated. For the uninitiated.
When you pretend you're wearing glasses. So, and I think the album is like, in name at least, it's like a follow up to the EP, which is called 1/Infinity, which came out in 2018, which for the record I haven't listened to. So this album came out back in August on Galaxy Cat Records. We were actually sent the album by In Black Records, who sent us that excellent Becca Starr album we covered on the last episode. So they must have some role in distributing it in the UK. And according to the press release, this album stemmed from a terrifying experience that Stephanie had in 2016, where she found herself aboard a plane from Rome to Amsterdam with a terrorist. I did try to find a news report on this, but I couldn't find anything. But regardless of that, it's an interesting incident to kind of spark the writing of an album, and she's kind of said that process kind of helped her cope with the feelings that were going through her mind at that time. And there's actually quite a lot of positivity in the music here, I would say, given that sort of subject matter. Yeah, absolutely. So the album opens with a kind of like atmospheric intro track. It's maybe about a minute and a half or so, and then the second track, it called "Losing My Nature," it just kind of bursts to life. And I've described it as a 10 out of 10 opener. It's got this main instrumental that sort of kind of harks back to like late 90s pop music and hip hop. It reminds me of some reason for like the instrumental parts of the song Still Dre, for some reason. Okay. It's got these kind of muted guitar chords, and I just find them like irresistible. And the vocals are quite childlike, but they're really catchy. There's a little bit of similarity with, I've said Arlo Parks. I don't know if that's strictly true, but I think there are some similarities in there, maybe in the sort of style and delivery of some of the vocals here. Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's a bit more to it than that as well. I've kind of described, I think this is maybe wrong. When I first kind of listened to it, like, it immediately put me in mind the likes of Bjork in terms of its feel and artistic scope. I'm not too sure how much I fully believe that now, to be honest. I definitely think there's a lot of kind of depth and texture to the album. I think, she seems to have blended a lot of different elements of kind of like prog, like almost like, I don't want to say prog rock, but kind of like progressive type stuff with a bit of kind of hip hop and R&B. And I think that maybe kind of chimes with what you were saying there as well. Certainly likes of Pleasure, for example, which I felt had a kind of real groove to it and something that I really enjoyed. I think it's quite interesting that, obviously the name, it comes from the Japanese, and there definitely seems to be a kind of oriental theme that's kind of peppered throughout the course of the album, that's kind of blended with these kind of ethereal, hushed vocals and soundscapes, which I thought was quite cool. I think there's elements of that in the likes of kind of Holy Night. However, the vocals are a bit more distant, muted, and I was going to serve as more of a kind of musical accompaniment on this number rather than kind of taking centre stage. Really bad, like that song Holy Night in particular, I found was a kind of really laid back and soothing number. I really enjoyed the kind of steel drums. I think it's kind of a steel drum sound anyway, or pan drums on the kind of outro of that song. So yeah, there's a lot going on this album. I think it's quite really quite experimental, I suppose, in terms of its kind of scope and, you know, different kind of elements and genres that it kind of draws on. So yeah, it was really great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that kind of oriental feel, and yeah, the Pleasure is a good example of that. There's a sort of there's like an almost like Indian drum beat in like the first few seconds, and then you've got these sort of Japanese kind of sounding flutes, but it's also got like an absolutely thumping bass line in it, which is like just really catchy and like really danceable. And I quite like the lyrics on that song, which I think go something like, "Life is a joker, some take it for granted, some never get to play, jumping out the exit." It's one of the kind of few kind of vocal lines that I sort of really kind of pulled out, because I think you mentioned like Holy Night is mainly instrumental. There are some vocals in there, but the vocals feel more like another instrument than a focal point. It's like, you know, it's a good example of how someone's voice is an instrument. It's, you know, it's another instrument in the kind of suite of instruments. It's not, you know, it's not a separate thing. So that was quite cool. Beat That My Heart is kind of nestled between those two songs, and it's got a kind of, it sounds a bit like Massive Attack's Teardrop. There's this sort of, it's got that sort of heartbeat kind of percussion to it almost, but then it kind of goes from that and drops back into that kind of Asian sounding, I've said sort of string flourishes, but you know, it makes it its own kind of thing, separates it from something like Teardrop. It feels very experimental, and I suppose maybe when you mentioned Bjork, that's kind of whether it sounds like Bjork particularly or not, there's that kind of experimental kind of ethos there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting because I've kind of written at the end of my notes here that reminds me a bit of Young Fathers. And I think it's that I think it's that same kind of experimental kind of ethos that they have, where it's not quite hip hop, it's not quite pop music, it's just kind of its own thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a lot that sounds like Young Fathers, and there's not an awful lot that sounds like this either.
No, I mean, you know, it's the same with you know, another kind of track that kind of stood out for me was "Love Me Like Warm Water." Which again, you know, if you spend time with, you kind of, if you spend enough time with it, rather, you know, you pick up something new every time. Again, you know, great deal of depth and texture to this. You know, if you listen carefully in the first opening seconds, you can hear samples of kind of drops of water accompanied with a clever reintroduction of kind of hand claps, which continue throughout the track. Vocals on this track are a bit more pronounced on this number, and I don't know if you felt this way as well, but I kind of felt as if there was almost kind of hints of a kind of country influence as well, which, you know, not like straight up like Dolly Parton type stuff, but yeah, I don't know what it was. That's the kind of vibe that I got, which, you know, didn't find off-putting. I thought it was good. I thought it was interesting. Yeah. What other tracks kind of stood out for yourself then?
Well, I would have picked out "Love Me Like Warm Water" as well. That's easily one of the best songs on the album. I'd say the next track, "Visitor," is really, really good as well. It's got these kind of powerful electronics, and it kind of builds quite a strong vocal crescendo that says something like, "Someday we'll go through the door, we'll reach the shore," and that kind of gets topped off with these kind of whining string sounds. That's a good track. And I think the closing track's really strong as well. "Silence Is My Nature."
Mm-hmm.
It's got more of that kind of Asian mysticism about it. There's a double bass in there somewhere as well, I think.
Yeah.
And then sort of these bending kind of picked guitars and more of those hand claps that you sort of hear on "Love Me Like Warm Water." And I think it's quite slow and measured, but it's a really strong closer.
Yes, I think like "Silence Is My Nature," if I remember correctly, as you said, kind of I've written opens with a turn of those kind of oriental sounds, that kind of oriental mysticism which you just talked about there. A really slick kind of double bass, which I loved. You've got to feel that there's a wee gourd in there somewhere as well, which was quite cool. You mentioned that kind of picking guitars. I've kind of mentioned them being kind of like noodling, spacey guitars. But the outro to that song definitely feels as if it kind of steps up a gear a little bit, and I kind of took on a bit more of a kind of dancey type feel to it, which I thought it was great.
Yeah, there's there's just so there's so many sort of subtleties and all the different kind of
I think
instrumentals
that's a
and
good
things
way of putting it, man.
like all over the album, and it just it rewards just multiple listens because it's just one of those things you just hear different things every time you listen to it.
Yeah.
Which is always a sign of a really good album.
Yeah. I'd quite like to see her live, actually. I'd like to see. Yeah, I think it'd be a really immersive experience. You know, you could just imagine the sound kind of washing over you. I think it'd be really cool.
I think there would be a lot of musicians on stage. I think because
Totally, there'd have to recreate that type of sound.
yeah, I think I read somewhere that the songs are kind of created over quite long periods of times with like lots of different sessions and stuff. I'm not sure where I read that, but and I haven't written it down, so I might be talking shite, but I'm pretty sure I did read that somewhere. So that's quite interesting, the way that those kind of slightly disparate elements are kind of layered up in this sort of dynamic way. So yeah, I think that would be a very interesting experience live.
Yeah,
definitely.
So in terms of rating, my man,
I have given this a very strong 9 out of 10, I think. I think there's maybe it's a really crap criticism, but I've just sort of said like I didn't really pick out that many kind of vocal bits to like sing along to. It maybe washes over me a little bit much, but I don't think that's really that big.
I've given it an 8, and my reasoning's kind of similar to yourself. I just felt as if I maybe needed to spend a bit more time to kind of pick apart the lyrics. I would say, yeah, definitely a strong 8. I mean, it's proper top tier stuff.
Yeah, because I mean those, the couple of sort of lyrics that I picked out, I only really picked those out on maybe like the third listen or something.
Yeah.
So there's probably a lot more to dive into there. So a very good album, no matter what way you put it.
Absolutely.
So okay, so that was To Infinity by O-SHiN.
For granted, so never get to play. Jump out of the exit. Far my numb fingertips, I drum the beat that my heart plays. Oh, I'm tender, I'm trapping it like there is no limit. Your water of the sea. Not a home. Someday we go through that door, we'll reach the shore, and I will always keep you. No, I am not afraid of you.
It's not finished. It's finished.